Chris Webster here, and I just wanted to thank all the people that are members of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Of course, our shows are always free, and members are what help keep them free. Other shows are on Patreon and similar sites and make you pay for content, not at the APN. If you want a little extra and want to give back, then head over to archpodnet.com/members. That's archpodnet.com/members to support archaeological education and outreach. Let's start the episode.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
We're all just failed Mayanists at this point. Like, oh yeah. Welcome to episode 4 of a Life in Ruins podcast. I'm your host, Carlton Gover, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Connor Johanna Nanananananan and David Howe.
If you've been following us for a bit, you might notice that archaeology isn't just pyramids or that ancient aliens bullshit. It's the study of human behavior. And one worldwide human behavior that you've probably all observed is the practice of tattooing and body modification. Well, that's not really our niche, but luckily for you, we've brought one of the world's leading experts on the archaeology of tattooing to talk with us today. In fact, he co-wrote the book on it. Tonight's guest, Aaron Deter-Wolf, is currently the prehistoric archaeologist at the Tennessee Division of Archaeology. Aaron is responsible for managing prehistoric sites on state-owned lands, as well as conducting archaeological excavations and publishing research on the results of those studies. Most importantly, Aaron is a prominent advocate for public archaeology, as evidenced by his work with the state of Tennessee, his scholarly publications, and his new Instagram at Archaeology Inc.
So before the ink dries, let's put a pin in this intro and get to the point of tonight's podcast.
All right, welcome to a Life in Ruins podcast. We're here with Aaron Deter-Wolf.
DeterWolf.
So Aaron, let me ask you the pertinent question of the day. How's the Nashville traffic?
Nashville traffic is lousy, man. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, did you survive today?
I survived today. You know, I've got to go like 7 miles between home and work, and it takes a solid half hour to 45 minutes, depending on the time of day. It's pretty awesome. Yeah.
Dang,
you're walking next to your car.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, it's years ago when I had fewer kids in the picture, I was actually with bike commute, and that took about half an hour or 45 minutes. So now I'm just kind of losing ground, I think. Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah. For those of you who don't know, Nashville is kind of one of those like big booming cities right now, and it used to be like a semi-quieter city, and now it's just like you can't go like anywhere without just being like in LA like traffic. It's crazy. Let's get into the meat of the podcast today. So, Aaron, would you like to tell the audience a little about who you are? We want to have you on here today to talk about anthropology. So, if you want to frame who you are in an anthropological sense for the audience, I'll let you take the reins.
Oh, good. So, I appreciate you guys having me. So, my name's Aaron, and in my day job, I am the prehistoric archaeologist for the Tennessee Division of Archaeology. We're part of the Department of Environment and Conservation with the Tennessee state government. So, under that big umbrella is everything from us to state parks to, stream water management to natural species to crayfish, everything in between. And we are a very small cog in this much bigger state government entity. And I've been with them now, coming up on 12 years-ish or so. Landed in Nashville back in 2001, took a CRM job out of grad school, and made the big sell, got my wife to leave Southern California and come to Nashville. Yeah, right? Yeah, about every February she reminds me of that.
They're like the exact same place, right? There's nothing different between.
No, it's 100% the same. Yeah, especially
palm trees
or the summertime. Yeah, that's great. Anyway, we made the big sell and was sort of in the right place at the right time when a gig with the Division of Archaeology opened up. And at the time I came on, I was, I think, the first new hire in about 20 years. And since that time, we're sort of reloading as people retire. So since I started, we've hired another 5 or 6 people. It used to be I thought I was gonna be the guy in Office Space, right? Like eventually, state archaeology would be like me in the bottom of the LNC tower with a filing cabinet, and they start locking my door and not letting me in. but no, we're with it, man. We're gearing up for the future. So we're great.
You still have your red stapler?
Yeah, that's right. I still have the stapler. Yeah.
For the public audience here, Aaron, would you mind explaining that? Does every state have an archaeologist? Is that like a common thing?
As far as I know, every state does. All states are come under the Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. So, in the very least, there's a SHPO, State Historic Preservation Officer. And part of the SHPO role is to permit archaeological projects that receive federal funding. Most states then also will have state permitting related to projects that touch on state lands or, state waterways or things like this. And so our office broadly handles both the federal and state permitting process. And then I actually am not a part of that. I'm part of then the information gathering and disseminating wing, archaeology propaganda. Can we call ourselves that? So working with old collections and doing site inspections. When someone's building a new shopping center in Nashville and hits prehistoric remains, which is like every Tuesday, I'm the guy that gets called about that. Independent research, educating the public, all of these sorts of things.
Very cool. So, in your early life, what kind of got you into anthropology or archaeology?
Yeah, so my dirty secret is that I don't actually have a degree in anthropology or archaeology. Right?
Just kidding.
Turns out you can play in the pool without the papers. Yeah. I thought I was going to be a Mayanist, along with so many other people, and got interested in that in high school and took a class my freshman year of college on Maya art and archaeology and just kind of fell in love with it. Where I went to undergrad did not have a 4-field approach archaeology program. So they had a cultural anthropology department, and then separate from that, a biological anthropology department. I think it's like evolutionary anthropology is maybe the real title. Anyway, and no archaeology. So archaeology sort of fell under the classical studies department at my school. And so what that meant is that once I figured out that, hey, maybe I wanted to do archaeology, I kind of had no place to go because I didn't really want to major in classics. And so I ended up doing art history instead. And the reason for that was because it sort of gave me this venue into looking at, broadly ancient artifacts from around the world. And sort of just became this giant choose your own adventure process. I found a field school in Belize after my freshman year of college and went down and did that. Then sort of engaged in this process of, so I'm going to date myself a little bit here. The internet was kind of a thing at that point, but not really a thing. And so what I ended up doing was basically cold calling anthropology departments around the country and just being like, hey, my name's Aaron, and I hear from so-and-so that you may have a project going this summer. If I can get myself there, can I work with you? And eventually found a really good fit with Antonia Foyas, who at the time was I think she's still up at Wheaton College in Massachusetts. She was doing work in Guatemala. And so I started going down there over the summer and working with Antonia on late classic Maya sites. Anyway, and so this was a point in, I think, academia as a whole where interdisciplinary studies were kind of a hot thing, kind of a hot topic. And so when I applied to grad school, I knew I wanted to do Maya studies, or I thought I wanted to do Maya studies. And at the time, two of the big sort of leading programs were Tulane University and University of Texas at Austin. And dream would have been to work with Linda Shealy at Austin, but she had just actually died my senior year. And so I ended up applying to Tulane and getting accepted there and in their Latin American Studies program, which at the time was awesome, man. I mean, it was, I got fully funded for an MA program. I got a full semester just writing, fully funded semester to just write my thesis. You didn't have to TA classes or anything like that. And because of the nature of the program, you got to pull classes out of different grad departments. And because of all the folks that were at Tulane, they had a fantastic Latin American history department, fantastic art history department. Elizabeth Boone's down there. She does Aztec codices and Aztec art. A lot of the anthropology classes are cross-listed in art history for that reason. And so I got to sort of pick and choose out of all those different classes and sort of build my own program on the way. So yeah, I thought I was going to be a Mayanist. And, it turns out there are more Mayanists than there are jobs for Mayanists.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, right. Like you can't turn around in Belize without running into another Mayanist. And so midway through my second year of grad school, I sort of looked around the program and was like, man, there's at least a dozen people here who I think deserve those jobs before I do, right? Who have the love and have the knowledge and should be professors. And so I ended up punching out after the MA and going into CRM, and hey, there you go, man. You put a couple 10 years of CRM under your belt, it turns out you know a few things about archaeology.
Yeah. It's kind of where we're all at right now.
Yeah.
Carlton's in school, but I think a lot of us wanted to be Mayanists, because that's the cool, sexy archaeology on this side of the world.
Sure. Yeah.
And I went into undergrad, and you have to take your gen ed lab science classes. I took astronomy because I thought that'd be cool to pair with Mayan archaeology for whatever reason.
Sure.
And totally should have taken geology, because I did not like astronomy, because it turned out to just be astrophysics and measuring light distance, and it was not fun. And ended up doing Paleo-Indian archaeology, which required no math.
And a lot of rocks.
I'm on the same boat. I wanted to be an underwater archaeologist in the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, looking at Maya sites, and now I work in the Central Plains with no water and no forest. So that was
right on.
And to add a third part to that, the inspiration for me getting into archaeology was actually visiting Chicken Pizza or Chichen Itza down in down in the Yucatan. So that it's funny how that can inspire us, and then we end up in Western Colorado doing pipeline work or
yeah man, Central Tennessee. Yeah, sure, it's just as glorious. I used to get summers used to be bad for me, right? Particularly once social media became a thing, because every summer I'd see my cohort from grad school, people be posting these and here's a temple, and here's the stela we just excavated, and hey, look at the jade workshop we're working on. And you're just oh man, I found a flake today and a couple pieces of whiteware, and it was awesome. Yeah. But it's gotten better since then.
Yeah, we just we're all just failed Mayanists at this point. Oh yeah.
But I think that's great, right? That whatever that process is, and it's spitting people out the other side who still have skills and knowledge to go on and do other things, right? We're not, and I think that's the great thing about, I think, at being at the MA level, I think that's the great thing about not going down that dissertation rabbit hole, right? Is that you're not so head into this one particular thing, and you've still got this kind of body of knowledge that you can put to different topics. So I end up in CRM and end up in Central Tennessee, and a decade or so later, I'm talking about tattooing in Egypt, right? I mean, why the hell not?
No, absolutely. And I think that's an excellent point. A lot of this, quote unquote, sexy stuff in archaeology, like you talk about Egyptology, the Maya, Aztec, or the Inca, is an initial draw to students coming into college or exploring the field of anthropology. And I mean, there's a startling realization when you get there, those fields are so saturated, but people are able to find something a niche for themselves that they find interesting somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty, big point of our field. And your work is extremely niche. And it's one of those weird things where people, look back and say, yeah, no shit, they did that.
Right.
Why wasn't anyone exploring this before? Yeah. It's one of those duh type of things. And so what transitioned you into starting to look into ancient tattooing exactly?
Yeah, so it actually started on a CRM project years ago, sitting around at lunch on box screens, right? Scratching poison ivy and showing off new tattoos. And I mean, you guys know this, right? Every archaeologist has an archaeology tattoo of some sort. Going back a decade, everybody's got their Maya glyph or their, Kokopelli pictograph or whatever it is. Everybody's got them. and sitting there talking with people about it at lunch, and I can't remember how it came up exactly, but basically started talking about the Theodore de Bry engravings from colonial Florida, right? So these depictions of the Spanish encountering Native Americans in Florida in the 1500s. And there's a lot of problems with those pictures, right? The guy who did those engravings, Theodore de Bry, he never went to the New World. He borrowed liberally from different sources. He made a lot of stuff up wholesale. But you look at those things, and the Native American bodies in those are just covered, right? Just head to toe covered with tattoos. And so we're talking about this at lunch, and we realize that, you juxtapose that with sort of the classic tradition of museum displays, these kind of replica displays where they, build dioramas of people in their wigwams, or, people on the Great Plains in their teepees, or things like this. And you're like, man, I have never seen a tattoo in any of those dioramas. Never once has there been a Native American body depicted as being tattooed. And from there, it sort of spun out into this, well, so let's assume that what's happening in the 1500s is not new, right? That it's been going on for at least, let's say, a century, probably more than that. Well, then why aren't archaeologists finding tattoo needles? And, that sort of sat in the back of my brain, and I just kind of chewed it over for, 10 years or so. And then in 2009, actually had the bandwidth to put together a session at the Southeastern Archaeology meeting on tattooing and body modification. Starting to get into this same thing, get into this idea. And for me, this is really sort of a material culture thing more than anything else, right? As an archaeologist, why aren't we finding the tools? Well, either because they're not there, which is unlikely, or they biodegraded, or maybe we've just not been looking for them all along. The old guard who wasn't tattooed themselves, who didn't look favorably on this practice, had their own hang-ups about Native culture and indigenous peoples. Maybe this was not a part of what they were interested in looking at. So, hey, maybe with new eyes and new technologies, we can step back and go, oh, hey, look, we can find some. And as it turns out, hey, look, we found some things. So it's pretty cool.
No, absolutely. And I think that's a great point, because, we don't, as archaeologists or even anthropologists, aren't always we don't look for everything unless we know it exists, right? So if we don't know that ancient tattooing was taking place, we're not going to look for the signs of it. So maybe there's some bone needles or some cactus spines that are just kind of odd, and they get mislabeled, and it's just lost.
And a lot of that, I think, has to do with artifact classification. When we pull things out of the archaeological record, we call them what we think they are, and we might not be right. Right. So I've got a buddy who talks about the idea that a knife. No, I'm sorry. He says a screwdriver is the perfect tool for opening a paint can, but that's not what the people who made the screwdriver intended it for. Right. So
that's a really cool analogy.
Right. If we pull things out of the archaeological record and say, well, obviously to me, this is X, Y, Z. Well, that may have nothing to do with the people who made it. That's all about me and our Western culture and modern interpretations. And so, when you talk about tattooing, then you really get to the root of that. This is a bone awl. Okay, fine. Except if it's not, right? It could be a gaming token. It could be a hairpin. It could be a tattoo needle. When we call it a bone awl and throw it into a museum, that's all it's ever going to be, unless we can get back at that somehow. That's been a lot of my stuff, is sort of the technology, looking at the wear patterns and technologies and things that we can use to reassess these old identifications.
Yeah.
And real quick, could you explain what a bone awl is and what it looks like?
Yeah. So bone awl is basically a pointy bone piece, right? So it's a piece of bone of any type, animal, human, fish, bird, that is longer than it is wide and has a point on at least one end. And, when we call things awls, right? AWL, what we're implying is that it's used for working leather or working hide. It's something that's used to punch a hole in leather or in hide, usually, while making clothes or making crafts. So when we call something an awl, it's basically shorthand for pointy bone thing.
Well, we need to go to our first break, but after the break, we will learn all about tattooing in the next session.
Well done.
There we go. Yeah. I was going to do a little voice for this, but I had to do the all joke. All right, we'll cut to break.
Are you ready to upgrade your GPS so you can use your phone or tablet to map data? Want to use mapping software of choice on your tablet of choice? What about sub-meter or sub-foot accuracy? Ready to get your GPS position fixed faster than you ever have in the past? I mean, come on, we all know how long that can take. Contact the GPS experts at Anatom GeoMobile Solutions to help transition to the latest mapping technology. Visit agsgis.com. That's agsgis.com or call 1-800-980-4649. These guys are pretty great, and I've used some equipment from them, and Matt Alexander, who is the VP of Sales, is an awesome person and will help you figure out exactly what you need. So agsgis.com, 1-800-980-4649. Hey everyone, Chris Webster here to tell you about all the awesome APN swag over at our TeePublic store. Check it out at arcpodnet.com/shop. You'll find APN stuff, but also some great designs that we've had submitted. Get your Bruce Trigger Warning cell phone case or your Bottle Guide t-shirts. So find the link at arcpodnet.com/shop. That's arcpodnet.com/shop.
And we're back to the second segment with our guest, Aaron Deter-Wolf. So, Aaron, you started out as a lithics guy. So you studied stone tools, and now you're trying to be more holistic. Is that correct?
Sure. That's how we'll bill it. Yeah. In graduate school, so I actually did my master's thesis looking at this set of late classic Maya figurines from a site I was working at, which is, again, pretty niche stuff, right? And so getting out of grad school and starting work in CRM, I sort of focused mainly on lithic technologies, on stone tool technologies. And that was great. But once I started doing more research, sort of getting back into actually trying to, do academic work, actually publish things that meant something more than just like your average CRM report, right? So, for your listeners who haven't done CRM, right, these are the worst things in the world. It's the report you write after you do a cultural resource management archaeology project. It's incredibly dry. It involves a lot of boilerplate. It's basically like just a catalog of everything you found. And if you're lucky, there's a little interpretation in there. And so once I started focusing more on interpretive stuff, I started realizing that lithics was kind of lousy for that, at least for me. The other thing that happened was I started having a really productive research partnership with my colleague, Tanya Perez, who is down at Florida State, and she's a zooarch. And so, once you start working with somebody who knows animal bones, right, it opens your eyes to this entirely new world of possibilities for interpretation. And it sort of took me out of that lithic silo and sort of got me thinking more about, great, so there's stone tools or there's animal bones or there's, this or that. Well, what does that actually mean, right? So what does this actually tell us about the people who made them and used them? So if we can step back out of counting flakes or talking about even the biface manufacturing sequence, right? How many primary, secondary, tertiary flakes there are, and instead look at what that could mean at a human scale, both site-wide and in terms of the individual person making those artifacts. I think we learn a lot more about the people in the past. And so over the years, then that's sort of become this sort of bigger thing in my research. A lot of the sites that I work with just by default have been archaic period. So forager societies, let's say circa 3,000 to 8,000 years BC-ish, 10,000 maybe BC, depending on where you go. And we sort of have this traditional idea of forager societies, of hunter-gatherers, as kind of, living in peace with the landscape, not making a big dent on their environment, not being very complicated socially, perhaps not having what we recognize as religion or ritual, and all that's crap, right? That's all just unadulterated horseshit. And, a big part of doing good archaeology is realizing that you can call bullshit on those things, right? You can go back into these traditional ideas of who people were in the past and be like, no, that's fine. Yeah, they're foraging, but man, they were really altering the environment in which they live. They're domesticating plants and animals. They're, practicing animist religion and ritual. they are not living at peace with one another. There's a lot of violence in the skeletal sample and interpersonal conflicts. And, we learn a lot more about who these people really were. And so that, I think, is sort of this, this idea of being more holistic in our interpretation of the past is, trying to be more true to the people that lived it, right? To their lived experience. I don't know what we call this. Is it, neo-post-processualism? Is it, touchy-feely hippie post-processualism?
Sure.
I have no idea, right?
Yeah.
It's something.
I really love the progression, because I did the exact same progression. You starting out as like a Mayanist, and you're like, okay, let's get into lithics, because that's what you find on these projects that are really interesting and cool and give you these dates. Yeah. And then you've kind of either you stay in that lithic silo, like you were saying, or you kind of go down different avenues. And for me, that was like using GIS to do spatial analyses. I just think it's awesome that that's kind of how you ran your life. And I don't know how normal that is, but it feels pretty normal to me. It's like, oh, these sexy points, I found them at field school, I want to study these for the rest of my life. And then I don't know, it just kind of sometimes doesn't pan out like that.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a lot of that's to do with like what you work with. It's the right tools for the job and the right theory for the job. If you're talking about like Paleo-Indian archaeologists, I mean, there's only so much they can use, and it's campsites, kill sites, and stone tools. They don't have pottery yet. They don't have some of these other things. And, things deteriorate in the archaeological record. And, if you're dealing with a site that's, 10,000 years ago, what's really going to remain? And so what can you surmise theoretically for some of these things? Like we mentioned religion or some of these other lived experiences, like those don't always remain. Those rarely remain in the archaeological record, because that's a lived experience that doesn't get absorbed into the ground.
Well, and, I think partnerships are important for that too. Like I said, I've had this really incredibly productive partnership with Tanya Perez over the last decade now, and part of that is this natural progression of when you get people together, and I think that's really the best thing that happens at conferences, right? Is we all sit down, we have a couple 3 beers, and then someone says something like, "But how do we know that Ötzi's tools were hafted in this way?" And and that leads to this 2-hour discussion. And then, 3 days later, everybody's like, I think we said something about Ötzi's stone tools a couple nights ago. Let's work on that. Yeah. And, and it sort of builds these collaborations then going forward. And I think that's the best thing for all of us, right? Is knowing who we can talk to. Because I think it's that idea of silos, right? We all know we know a lot about very specific topics. And we got to be willing to, add people into our research, right? Add second and third and 12th co-authors to what it is that we're doing. Bring the best minds and the best topics to bear, and also then be willing to share our knowledge with other people. Try to lift each other up, right? It's that the rising tide floats all boats idea.
Yeah, fair enough. And just to real quick, just to recap, Ötzi is a 5,300-year-old individual that was found. He's a mummy. He's basically freeze dried, that was found in the Alps bordering Italy and Austria.
Yep.
Perfect. And he had 61 tattoos on his body, and was found with like completely preserved. And you can even see the wound that killed him. Like, it was an amazing like forensics cold case that dates over 5,000 years ago, and he's in archaeology especially. Yeah, straight up cold case on so many different levels. I mean, like, he is just huge in archaeology because we have a freeze-dried person with all of his clothes. We have the pollen that's in his stomach from the food that he ate. We can track his movements throughout the Alps within the period that he died. We can see how he died. I'm pretty sure it was a projectile point that went through his back and into it severed an artery in his shoulder, and he just bled out and was left there. And it's one of those things like, why did he die? And then more specifically, like, his tattoos are extremely interesting and are talked about, like, what their function was. And would you be able to like elaborate on your thoughts on the tattoos on Ötzi, Aaron?
Sure. Yeah. So, 1992 or 1993, I think they found this guy melting out of the ice on the Italian side of the Alps. And were marks on his body that were visible when he was first pulled out of the ice. And in some of the very early news coverage of the find, you find a couple places where people surmise that because he had these tattoos, surely he was a highwayman or someone of ill repute that must have, been turned on by his gang and left to die on the ice, right? So it's this fantastic example of the sort of biases that can shape this work. But we know now that there were at least 61 tattoos on his body, and most of his epidermis is gone, right? Most of his epidermis disappeared because of exposure to the glacier. And tattoos sit basically at the juncture between your dermis and your epidermis. So, think about that in terms not only of the chances that this guy is going to survive under a glacier, but that just enough of his skin disappeared, but not too much. Who knows? Another 100 years, none of those marks may have survived. They all may have been, that carbon may have been sucked out into the surrounding ice.
Yeah.
So it's this incredible happenstance that this body was ever preserved to begin with. And there's been a lot of these talk about his tattoos that they are groups of lines. There's a couple of cross shapes. They tend to be on his joints, and they tend to align to the long aspect of his body. So they run up and down his arms or up and down his spine. And over the years, people have pointed out that some of these tattoos correspond to areas on his body where he suffered from arthritis or possibly from other ailments. And of course, we know this from his skeleton underneath. And so there's been this idea that his tattoos might be medicinal or might be therapeutic, that they were marks that were applied to treat his arthritis. And there cross-culturally, there are examples of tattooing being used to treat ailments, right? Everything from spiritual possession to headaches. And that's a really interesting idea. Now, at the same time, I will fight you about this because just because we don't understand what 3 lines in a row meant to him didn't mean that those marks aren't symbolic, right?
Right.
We don't understand his art or his symbols. And so looking at these marks and saying, well, they are not symbolic, they don't have meaning, I just don't think we can do that. I think that's a step too far.
Right. And because of his tattoos, people originally thought he was some sort of medicine man or a shaman because of all the marks on him. And it wasn't until they started doing some of that skeletal analysis that you mentioned where they started aligning some of those tattoos with, arthritis underneath at his joints, that some of those interpretations started to change. And I know they've made a couple movies about him too, which are interesting.
So he started out as like a biker gang guy and then transitioned into like a shaman and now he's just a normal person who might have been expressing his culture through tattoos.
Before he was murdered, shot in the back and left to die on a glacier. That's a run.
Remember reading when I was doing a research paper on like zoonotic diseases that Ötzi had one of the earliest cases of Lyme disease. And I believe he also had like a severe dairy and gluten intolerance too. I know it was dairy, I think also gluten, but he had like one of those genes for that. So the dude was just probably like just walking in pain constantly. And then he just died brutally.
He had whipworms in his colon, right? He had low grade arsenic poisoning, as I recall. His hair follicles showed low grade arsenic poisoning. Yeah, I mean, he was living
the Oscar more than Leo does for The Revenant.
Right.
Yeah, and something kind of like roping it back in is that in order to see tattoos in the archaeological record, you need skin. And that rarely happens. If you talk to any archaeologist, they show bones. Unless you're a forensic anthropologist and see skin and organs all the time, you really need mummies. And like Ötzi is the oldest one that we have, and there's some that show up in Peru with the moche, and then also in the Philippines, the Iboloi culture. I probably butchered that, but those are all AD mummies.
And it's all over the world, man. Honestly, so one of my side projects is the Tattooed Mummy Database, which is just sort of this running list of every tattooed mummy that I can run down. And they are, starting with Ötzi. Let's call him the oldest. The pre-dynastic ones out of Egypt that were found, a year or two ago now, are pretty much contemporaneous with Ötzi. But, from there, they basically cover like all 4 corners of the earth except for Australia, all the way up through Yeah, and in Antarctica, all the way up through the late centuries AD. So yeah, it's a global thing.
Yeah,
but I was going to say you'll find you'll see a lot of skin at archaeological excavations. It just won't be prehistoric, at least in the past.
It's a lot of red upper asses.
Right. Sweaty.
That's the real archaeology.
Yeah.
I meant to ask you here to kind of get back to like the point of we're kind of off track here, but I'm loving the conversation. With all this like side projects, with all the side projects and stuff that you have going on, like, does your job allow you to do this? Because my job has been really great in letting me just like gallivant around the world the past year. So like, are they treating you well there?
Oh, they're fantastic. Yeah, it's I managed to get the independent research in, depending on what it is in the topic. I have some leeway if it can be tied into, my local archaeology, for example. So looking at tools from here in Tennessee or looking at Native American questions, I have leeway to do that to a greater or lesser extent. When I start looking at things like Egyptian mummies or things like that, that's a little more on the old vacation time there.
Okay. You were teaching at MTSU at some point too, right? And was it on tattooing?
Yeah, so I've been adjuncting a class down there for them since 2009 or so. Just about every semester I'll teach there, or teach a section of Intro to World Prehistory, which is just a non-major gen ed course. And then starting in 2013, they let me develop a upper level anthropology tattooing class. And so I'll teach that about every 2 years now. I just taught it last fall. So it'll probably be next fall or the year after before I teach it again.
Sure.
Well, that's cool. Do you enjoy being an adjunct? I've heard varying degrees of enjoyment as being an adjunct.
Yes, I really enjoy being an adjunct, but that's because I have a real job. Yeah. So, I have a full-time job in healthcare and a wife who's a lawyer and supports my archaeology habit. And so what that means is that, I have the freedom to pick up a class and not have to worry about the money, right? The most valuable part of doing the adjunct thing for me has been getting university library access, because that's not actually something we have through the state. So getting access to JSTOR, man, that is, that's worth its weight in gold right there.
Well, absolutely.
It's like the academic Netflix subscription. Like you have to have someone that has one to like get it.
Yeah.
When mine finally expired last year, I was like, oh, what the hell do I do now? Like I couldn't look anything up. But yeah.
So at this point, we're going to lead into our second break. We'll be back and we'll talk about how tattoos form on bog bodies and how legit they are, unless Aaron leaves this conversation right now.
Hey, I'm Chris Webster, and this is your Wild Note tip of the month for October 2019. As we move into the off-season for much of the Northern Hemisphere, you might be wondering what to do with your fancy digital data management software. Well, here are some ideas. WildNote can be used to help catalog artifacts in the lab. Just export a pivot table and import into your existing database. Create new forms to manage proposals and report writing tasks. Not all forms for data collection have to be exported. They can just be used for organization and internal data gathering. Finally, test out new forms for the next field season. Check out our safety forms or build your own. If you aren't using WildNote yet, head over to wildnoteapp.com. That's wildnoteapp.com for all your digital data collection needs and a free trial. Hey everybody, Chris Webster here, and as we head into the off-season for much of the Northern Hemisphere, it's time to buckle down and write those reports. As we all know, the time you work on the report has to be accounted for. That's where Timular comes in. Timular is a time-tracking app, but it also has a physical component. Just flip the Timular cube to the side that represents what you're doing, and it stops time on one task and starts it on another. Check out Timular over at arcpodnet.com/Timular. That's arcpodnet.com/TIMEULAR.
And we're back to our third segment here with Aaron Deter-Wolf. So Aaron, David has informed us of a particular aspect of archaeology that you thoroughly enjoy, and that is bog bodies and the possibility of tattoos on those bodies. Now, real quick, bogs are important in archaeology because if you find something in a bog, bogs are anaerobic, meaning that there's no oxygen that deteriorates these things, so they're highly pristine. So, David, do you want to elaborate on this enjoyment that Aaron has for bog bodies?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the oldest atlatls they found comes from bogs, and I think bows too. So it's just like bogs literally hold the secrets to everything. So there needs to be an investigation to just bogs around the world. But anyway, yeah, so a lot of people were saying that these bog bodies that they found, I believe somewhere in Europe, had tattoos like all over them. But then I also understand that you don't feel that way.
Yeah, so don't shoot the messenger on this one, man.
Sure.
So for starters, I should put this back on you because this is kind of your fault. So David had this idea that I should do this Instagram, and he's actually he's actually the reason that we started this new Instagram project, this Archaeology Inc. Fascinating shit about ancient body modification, right?
Yes.
And so, as you guys probably know from Instagram, you're limited in what you can post, right? So you gotta sort of weigh that, like, number of words you want to bore your audience with versus the picture involved.
Sure.
And anyway, so this project I think it's a great project. It was, after David suggested it, I sort of soul searched about it a lot because I wasn't sure that this was something I wanted to do. It's a little bit, I don't know, that's a little bit new social media for me. I'm more comfortable on the Facebook.
You got 1,000 followers this week.
Yeah, it's going well. People are interested in it, right?
Yeah.
But again, this is the silos idea. Like, there's a lot of people out there that know way too much, and if we can draw this information out. Well, anyway, so one of the posts that we put up was about bog bodies. And so the short answer here is that, there are these bog bodies, these preserved human skeletons and skins that have been found throughout Northern Europe over the last century or two. And you'd think, well, okay, we have preserved skin. Well, if these are ancient people, well, then maybe they were tattooed. And there was this one researcher, and honestly, I can't even come up with his name right now, who, in the early 20th century, I believe, published a series of articles in German talking about how hundreds of these bodies were had tattoos on them. And that's it's one of these things that sort of entered into the conventional wisdom, particularly of the tattoo community. There's obviously a very strong European tattoo scene right now. And a lot of these sort of traditional designs, neo-pagan, Viking style designs, all of this kind of thing are very popular. And so there's this appeal to the idea that, this is following a tradition that is several hundred or several thousand years old. People like seeing the idea that what they're doing has these roots. But the fact of the matter is that none of the existing bog bodies that have been re-examined in the last decade or two have tattoos on them. And this is even using, infrared imaging and alternative light sources and things like this. They're just not tattooed. And some other researchers dug back into this earlier publication that said all of this about the bog bodies, and it's just rife with errors, right? Like they figured, I think they like less than 3% of the bodies that this guy talked about, they could actually corroborate that they even existed. Sources that he cited just didn't exist. People that he said he'd interviewed didn't exist. All these kinds of problems. So it basically just comes down to this, like, it seems to basically be this one guy's fantasy. It may have been rooted in the fact that he published this around the same time that the Pazyrak bodies in Siberia were found, which is these very famous Iron Age horse rider culture with these these fantastic animal designs all over them that were recognized as being tattoos. And so maybe he was interested in getting that same kind of attention. We just don't know. He's not alive anymore. But no, the short answer is that bog bodies are not tattooed, at least that we can confirm.
Okay. And someone on your Instagram had kind of poked or had brought that up, right? Is that, yeah. Because that's something I wanted to talk about, with this new frontier, as it were, that you and I are venturing into with the social media archaeology. I've gotten some weird comments on things too, and it's not only do we make ourselves the the spokespeople for our various niches, but like then we also have to like police that kind of, it's like you're like,
yeah. How do you break someone's heart, right? It's like breaking up with someone. Yeah, you gotta be like, it's not you, it's the Bog Bodies. We can still be friends.
And like you just want to keep up like the good science, but then I'll get some like weird like comments in there about like someone once said like, I doubt that wolves and dogs are the same thing because like I think fennec foxes look just like chihuahuas, and I was like, well, like fennec foxes are foxes. And not so like I just like didn't know how else to like say it without like I don't know. I'm getting into something different.
No, but it's true. That's constantly an issue with public outreach and archaeology, right? I'm sure you guys have been in these situations where you give public presentations or you're talking to elementary schools. I mean, the perfect example, right, is I go talk to my son's elementary school. And, the first thing you say is, hey, archaeologists don't dig up dinosaurs, blah, 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 right? And then you finish and you ask for questions and 13 hands go up and every one of them wants to tell you about the Tyrannosaurus skull they found, right?
Sure.
It's anytime you talk to the public, there's that question of what gets through and what meets up against the episode of Ancient Aliens that they saw last night. And so, you're going to field questions about giants and about aliens and about, the lost tribes of Israel and the gold scarab beetle that was buried on Lookout Mountain in Chattanooga. And, take your pick, right? And part of it's learning to deal with those things as they come up in public settings where, you want to be appreciative of the fact that people are interested in this topic and you want to tell them the truth or the archaeological truth as we best understand it, but you also don't want to tell them they're idiots because that's not doing anybody any good.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah. And so you got to find that middle ground.
Yeah, it's how much time and energy do you want to like put into correcting people at some junctures? I mean, being in the social media world and talking about things, you often it's like, how much time do you actually want to put into it?
Well, especially if you have like 1,000 followers or something, that's a lot of time to put into it. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And I was just at a recent family event. My niece graduated and, it was my American Indian family and they were asking me about giants in the archaeological record.
I get that a lot. Yeah.
I'm like, I'm sorry they don't exist. And then my cousin was just like, well, I know this high school social studies teacher who says he's found giants and he knows they exist. And I'm like, congratulations. I don't know what to tell you. They don't, they're not around.
Yeah.
Like and with, like, I can imagine with you, David, with ethnocynology, the stuff that you get, and even like now that we're branching out.
That warms my heart.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad. I don't know what to tell you. But like just some of these other things, it's just like with other public outreach events, you get comments from people. Like I did a YouTube interview where I was talking about human sacrifice, and the amount of comments I got from that, it was just like, I don't have time for this. I don't have time to address every single ridiculous question or comment that I've gotten from this. I have a PhD student, like. Anyways, so like what kind of, from your Archaeology Inc., and I absolutely love that Instagram, by the way, like that's just phenomenal.
Good. Thank you, man.
It's been
like
great.
what are some of the more interesting comments or questions that you've received from this public outreach venture?
I have actually not received a lot of comments yet. At the beginning, there was some pretty good dialogue going between a couple of us that are contributing it to it and a couple of our friends. So, this is this sort of social media interaction that had been happening sort of out of the public eye, right? University of Facebook that had been going on for a long time. And some of those discussions then started taking place in the comment sections of the Instagram. And I think those are great. And, they sort of balance between like, people who are very hard and fast, like, science is science and, everything else is bunk. And people who then, because of the subject matter, may lean more towards, sort of new age mentalities and ideas. New age spirituality is related to tattooing and body modification. And, there's a lot of common ground there. But, if it swings too far either way, someone's going to call someone an asshole and ostracize other people, right?
Yeah,
and so keeping it civil is, I think, really, really important. So far, I've gotten some really nice comments along the way, but there's not actually a lot of discussion that's happened. And I'm not sure why that is. Some of it may be that when I'm talking about these South American mummies, maybe there's just not enough people that know enough about them to kick into that.
Sure.
I'm not sure what the reason for that is at this point.
Maybe that just comes with more followers. I've kind of often wondered that too. Like just
either that or sexy, the sexiness of the archaeology meme.
All you have to do is drop something about evolution, and the absolute vitriol that will occur is just amazing. I don't know if you have this guy named Archaeology Gains, his Instagram. I hope to God he follows. Yes, I absolutely love watching his posts, and then because he'll comment people and he'll roast them, and it makes my day because I'm just like, this is our Instagram warrior right here, and I'm pretty sure he's a follower of this podcast. So if Archaeology Gains is listening, dude, you have my full 100% support.
So I had a really interesting experience with a co-author recently. This guy, Andrew Gilworth Brown, who's out at University of Washington, he brought me on. I rode shotgun with him on this paper identifying this 2,000-year-old cactus spine tattoo tool from Utah. And I don't know what happened. It hit at I think their university did a really good job putting it out on Eureka Alert, and it hit at one of these weird media moments where it just blew up. And so, different media outlets are covering this story, stealing text from one another and copying and pasting without editing and, writing their own things about it without talking to the authors and all of this. But of course, the comment sections on those stories are just a hot mess, man. I mean, internet comment forums are just terrible to begin with. And when you get into a topic like tattooing, it's just freaking awful. But so in a lot of these stories, people were, just kind of off the wall theorizing. And Andrew did a fantastic job of actually taking the time to track all of the coverage and actually going into the comment sections using his real name, not being like archaeologist 420, but actually using his real name as a handle, just to pick one. I don't know that guy. I'm sure he's out there. But, using his real name as a handle and actually then answering people's questions and not just answering them, but saying, oh, hey, I'm the first author on this, and here's the answer to your question. And it was really well received, man. People really, really seemed to respond to that.
So it was like the direct engagement was like a more efficient way of kind of doing this, as opposed to just kind of publishing and having that data stay in academia and having it exist there.
Well, I don't know if it's efficient, right? It takes a hell of a lot of his time to do it.
Oh, for sure.
But at least, individual people are then getting their queries answered instead of just throwing them into the void.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really interesting.
And I do want to mention that tattoo, that needle thing, you were quoted and talked about in an article from National Geographic about that 2,000-year-old needle tattoo. Yeah, that was a nice little piece of coverage. We reached out to them ahead of time and sort of gave them first crack at it before it came out. And so they had the author of that piece had the time to actually talk to each of us individually and build a story around it, which was pretty great. Cool. No, it's absolutely phenomenal. For any of our followers, that's at National Geographic. The title is 2,000-Year-Old Tattoo Needle Identified by Archaeologists by Krista Langlois, Langlois. So please give that a read because it's a really short and phenomenal piece.
Carlton was asking me about this earlier today, and I know, Aaron, you're probably one of the foremost authorities on this, but Carlton's very interested in getting...
That was in air quotes.
Oh, okay, true. Go ahead. Sure. You at least know more about it than I do. We'll say that. He would love to get a hand-poked tattoo. And are you able to talk about that in any capacity? I know you have one, right?
Yeah, sure. Hand poke tattooing is a thing, right? And a surprising number of my Instagram followers are hand poke tattoo artists. Go figure.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Here in the States, people tend to do mainly, electric work. And a lot of that has to do with, individual health codes, depending on where you go. Tattooing is not regulated at a national level. It's more sort of at the municipal level. But if you go to, for example, tattoo conventions in Europe, there are whole rooms of people who will be doing hand poke tattoos or will be doing, Polynesian hand tap style stuff. These artists, they're all over the world, man. There's a strong tradition of this. And you can you can do hand poke or hand tap tattoos and meet the necessary health codes even here in the States. It just takes jumping through some hoops and, thinking a little creatively to do it. Of course, hand poke tattooing gets a bad rap because it's stick and poke, right? It's what everybody does in their basement with their buddies. And, that is dangerous. Bloodborne pathogens are a thing. You should only get a tattoo by someone who's been trained.
Listen up.
In these trained, right, exactly. Trained in dealing with bloodborne pathogens in the setting of a tattoo shop. Now, having said that, a lot of people don't. I have one. I have friends and colleagues who have several at this point, and this is the fault of science, I'm going to say, because, so I started down this research track of how do you tell when an artifact has been used to tattoo? And started looking at the idea of microscopic use wear, right? The idea that when you use a tool for something, it leaves a distinctive microscopic pattern behind. And so when we started doing this work, we were doing it with pigskin, right? Pigskin's a pretty good forensic proxy for human skin. But, once you start making a bunch of artifact replica possible tattoo tools and have them laying around, it's just a matter of time before some genius sits up and puts their beer on their forehead and says, "I've got an idea." How do we know?
Puts their deer on their forehead?
Their beer on their forehead? You guys don't do that? You hold the beer up to your forehead when you want to talk? No, maybe. Okay, sorry, it's a thing.
Put your deer on your forehead. I was like,
oh, that could be a thing, right?
I thought it was like a light bulb, but instead of a light bulb, it's a beer.
It is. It's a beer. Beer can instead of a light bulb. It's exactly right. Anyway.
That's our new logo.
How do we know that dead pig skin leaves the same wear signature as live human skin? And well, we don't. No one's tested that. So let's go get the bone and needles. And and this is where it takes a turn, right? And this is the joke is, right, experimental archaeology turns into experiential archaeology. So not just the act of making, but the act of receiving as well. And this is an interesting process, and it certainly has taught me a lot about both how much it hurts to be tattooed by a cactus spine, but also the logistics involved in crafting a tool that you can do that with, and using it and cleaning it and storing it and all of these other things. So it becomes a part of the dialogue, then a part of how we understand these possible tattools in the artifact record.
So that'll lead me to my next question. For the audience who's not used to anthropology or might not be anthropologists, where do you feel that tattooing sits in the realm of anthropology? What does tattooing mean for humanity in an anthropological sense?
Oh, wow. Well,
I should have asked that a little more dumber, but
no. I mean, it's, I think at this point in our, our collective history, let's go ahead and say that 50% of people under age 30 have at least one tattoo.
Right. I think we all do here.
The statistics are shifting. I think the last Pew Research poll was 3-4 years ago now, but particularly among the millennial generation. So, this thing is it's not unusual, and I think that gives us a chance to look at it with fresh eyes. And when you do that, you start to realize that it's global. I mean, honestly, I would put it on the scale. Now, from a very pro-tattoo standpoint, I would put it on a scale of something like ceramics or fire, right? That seems to be so deeply rooted in our human condition that all these groups throughout human history all over the world have done this thing. And we can't parse out yet whether they all invented it on their own, or whether maybe it's one of these things that's as old as Homo sapiens, right? That our ancient ancestors carried out of Africa with us. We can't figure that out yet. I'd love to, but we're not there yet. But you're looking at this practice that's global, that's ancient, and that is very different depending on where you go, and that yet shares a lot of similarities in the reasons that it's done and what it means to the cultures that did it. And it's one of these things that we're losing until very recently has been vanishing very rapidly. This was one of the many things that colonialism and introduced diseases, and Christian missionization did a really thorough job of stomping out all around the world was these indigenous tattoo traditions. And we sort of are at this critical moment where, over the last 2 or 3 generations, the last tattooed elders have died, or the last tattooed elders are now alive. And so in some cases, there's been a rupture in those traditions, and people may never be able to reclaim them for what they were. In other cases, there's still a chance to save that knowledge, to get back those things that were taken from indigenous cultures all around the globe. And so that, I think, is the most valuable and most important thing is this idea that it's part of individual identity, and it's part of, both on the global scale and on the individual cultural scale. And that if people can refine that, it helps us all sort of find a center, find a place in this global culture, while also manifesting, the things that are good about our individual cultures, about those individualities, about that uniqueness that different cultures have.
Well, and on that point, I think this is a good place to stop, and thank you for that just fantastic answer. We really appreciate, and thank you for being on the podcast. Because this is called A Life in Ruins, we always have to ask at the end, if you had your choice, would you do it again? Would you be an archaeologist?
Yeah, absolutely, man. No doubt about it. I have landed in a great place. I think I'm really lucky compared to some of my peers as far as the job that I have and the structure that I have to work in and the research that I've been doing, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. It's what I want to do, and it's what I really love doing.
Well, thanks, Aaron. Awesome. And we're going to shout out his Instagram at Archaeology Inc.
That's right.
And we just interviewed Aaron Deter-Wolf, an archaeologist who studies tattooing in the past and who works for the state of Tennessee's Division of Archaeology. So we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to A Life in Ruins podcast.
You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at A Life in Ruins Podcast, and you can also email us at alifeinruinspodcast@gmail.com.
And remember, make sure to bring your archaeologists in from the cold and feed them beer. So I've never understood this before. Why is it so hard to find evidence of tattooing in the archaeological record?
Jesus Christ, I don't know.
I don't know. Why?
I mean, you could describe it as finding a needle in a clay stack, but not always clay. Some gravel stacks or stand stacks.
You're off. You're fired.
This show is produced by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in Reno, Nevada at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks for listening all the way to the end. This is Chris Webster with a quick reminder to check out archpodnet.com/members to help support us in archaeological education and outreach. That's archpodnet.com/members. Now go listen to more podcasts. 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 Now go listen to more podcasts.